The cold rain pelted down over Alexandria Harbor that October night, bathing the city in a silver-gray veil that distorted headlights and turned the Potomac River into a dark, writhing mass. Through the downpour, the emergency lights of an ambulance cut harsh red and white patterns across the wet pavement. Inside, Ethan Reynolds gripped the overhead handle as his partner, Jake Matthews, navigated the slick streets toward the Woodrow Wilson Bridge, where dispatch had reported a multiple vehicle collision. 36 hours into a 48-hour double shift, Ethan's body operated on automatic pilot, a machine of professional reflexes honed by 3 years of emergency response work. The exhaustion that weighed his shoulders down and burned behind his eyelids was familiar, almost comforting in its predictability. Sleep was a luxury that would come eventually. For now, there were lives that needed saving. The radio crackled with updates. 2 vehicles involved, possible fire risk, 1 patient trapped, Riverside Bridge eastbound lanes. Ethan mentally inventoried the equipment they'd need as Jake accelerated siren wailing through the night. Alexandria's historic district fell away behind them as they sped toward the bridge that connected Virginia to Maryland across the dark waters of the Potomac. At 36, Ethan moved with the quiet efficiency of someone who'd learned to do more with less. The lean muscle under his uniform came from hauling equipment and carrying patients, not from the luxury of a gym membership. His hands remained steady despite the exhaustion, despite the hollowness in his stomach that never fully went away these days. Those hands had once designed aerospace fuel systems that propelled machines into the sky. Now they performed chest compressions, secured tourniquets, and held the hands of the dying. Different work, same purpose, keeping people safe. The bridge loomed ahead, its massive spans partially obscured by sheets of rain. Police cruisers had already established a perimeter, their blue lights pulsing in the darkness. Jake eased the ambulance to a stop, and Ethan was out the door before the vehicle had fully settled, medical jump bag in hand, rain immediately soaking through his uniform jacket and plastering his dark hair against his forehead. A police officer directed them toward the wreckage. A sedan had hydroplaned and clipped a sleek, expensive coupe, sending it spinning into the guardrail. The coupe's front end was crumpled like an accordion, airbags deployed, and the acrid smell of gasoline hung sharp in the cold air. Smoke curled from beneath the hood, promising worse to come if they didn't move quickly. Ethan's training kicked in, pushing aside fatigue and discomfort. He circled to the driver's side while Jake retrieved the extraction equipment. Through the shattered window, Ethan saw her. A woman slumped against the deflated airbag, blood streaking her temple. Glittering shards of safety glass nestled in her blonde hair, like macabre diamonds. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" Ethan called, his voice calm and professional, despite the urgency of the situation. No response. The door was jammed, metal twisted from the impact. Jake appeared with the Halligan bar, and together they forced it open with a screech of protesting metal. Ethan stabilized her cervical spine while Jake cut through the seatbelt. Together they eased her onto the pavement, away from the smoking vehicle. The rain washed pink rivulets of blood down her face as Ethan began his assessment, his hands moving with practiced precision. Airway first partially obstructed with blood and debris. He suctioned quickly, inserted an oral airway, and reached for the bag valve mask, breathing shallow and labored. He squeezed the bag in smooth, even compressions, watching her chest rise. Circulation, carotid pulse weak and thready. Disability pupils sluggish but reactive. Exposure lacerations to the scalp and forearm, possible internal injuries from the impact. Jake had the monitor set up, leads attached to the woman's chest. Sinus tachycardia, 130 beats per minute. Blood pressure dropping 80/50. Ethan glanced at the screen, then back at the woman's face, a strange sense of familiarity nagging at him. Something about the elegant arch of her brows, the determined set of her jaw, even in unconsciousness. "Start a wide-open line," Ethan directed, already preparing the collar and backboard. "We need to move fast." They worked in synchrony, securing IV access, administering a saline bolus, placing the cervical collar. But as they lifted her onto the backboard, the monitor screamed a warning flatline. No pulse. Cardiac arrest. "Start compressions," Ethan said, and Jake positioned himself over her chest. Ethan grabbed the medication kit, drawing up epinephrine with practiced efficiency. The rain hammered down around them, soaking through his uniform to the skin as he pushed the drug through the IV line. 1 milligram epi in, he announced, watching the monitor for any response. Nothing. "Continue CPR, 30 compressions, 2 breaths, 30 compressions, 2 breaths, the rhythm of potential salvation. 1 minute passed, 2 minutes, the rain didn't stop and neither did they. At 2 minutes and 40 seconds, just as Ethan was preparing for another round of epinephrine, the monitor blipped. A single QRS complex appeared, followed by another. Sinus rhythm weak but present. Ethan felt for the carotid pulse and found it fluttering beneath his fingertips. "We've got her." He exhaled, the relief palpable in his voice. "Let's move." They loaded her into the ambulance and Ethan climbed into the back while Jake took the wheel. The drive to Alexandria General would take approximately 6 minutes in this weather. Ethan kept one hand on her pulse, the other adjusting the oxygen flow, his eyes vigilant on the monitor. She was stable, barely, but alive. It wasn't until he leaned over to check her pupillary response again, pulling back the oxygen mask slightly, that he saw her face clearly under the interior lights. The recognition hit him with physical force, a punch to the gut that momentarily robbed him of breath. Alexandra Westbrook, CEO of Westbrook Aerospace, the woman who had signed his termination letter 3 years ago. The ambulance suddenly seemed to tilt beneath him as memories crashed in like the waves of the Potomac during a storm. The termination meeting, the fabricated evidence, the signature at the bottom of the document that had destroyed his career, his marriage, his life. Alexandra Westbrook's signature. His hands began to shake and he pulled them back, clenched them into fists, forced himself to breathe. The rage came fast and sharp, a blade that had lost none of its edge despite the passing years. Every humiliation, every night spent at that cheap kitchen table, trying to explain to his daughter why they couldn't afford new shoes or school trips, it all came rushing back in a flood as potent as the rain hammering the ambulance roof. But then his eyes caught the monitor, tracking the tentative rhythm of her heartbeat. He watched the rise and fall of her chest and heard his own voice in his head, the mantra that had gotten him through 3 years of survival: patient first, everything else after. He reached for the blood pressure cuff and took another reading, 85/58. Rising, he adjusted the IV drip, checked her airway again, and did his job. Because that's what Ethan Reynolds did. That's who he was, even when the universe seemed determined to test the limits of his integrity. When they pulled into the ER bay at Alexandria General, he kept his voice steady as he handed off to Dr. Lauren Bennett, the attending physician on duty. Female mid-30s, MVC with rollover. Rusk after 2 rounds of epi and 4 minutes of CPR. GCS was 3 at scene, now 5. Vitals stabilizing, lacerations to scalp and forearm, possible internal bleeding. Dr. Bennett nodded, already directing her team. "Good work, Ethan. We'll take it from here." Jake clapped him on the shoulder as they walked back to the rig. "Hell of a save, man. You okay?" Ethan nodded curtly. He wasn't okay, but he would be. He always was. By the time they restocked the ambulance and cleared the call, word had already spread through the ER. A nurse mentioned the name Westbrook, and suddenly everyone knew the CEO of Westbrook Aerospace. The woman whose face appeared in business journals and company announcements was in trauma bay too. Jake gave Ethan a sidelong look. "You know who that is, right?" "Yeah," Ethan said quietly. "I know." "You good?" "I did my job, that's all." But when Ethan walked past the trauma bay and saw Alexandra Westbrook through the glass intubated monitors beeping a team of medical professionals working over her, he felt something crack inside his chest. Not pity, not satisfaction. Just exhaustion, the kind that came from carrying weight for so long that you forgot what it felt like to put it down. He pulled out his phone and called home. His daughter Lily answered on the second ring, her voice sleepy. "Dad, hey kiddo, just wanted to hear your voice. Are you okay?" He closed his eyes, leaning against the hallway wall. "Yeah, I'm okay. Did you finish your homework?" "Yes, and I left pancakes in the oven for when you get home." "You're the best, Lee." "I know," she said, and he could hear the smidge in her voice. "Love you, Dad." "Love you too." He hung up, slid down the wall to sit on the floor, and let himself feel all of it, the anger, the confusion, the bitter irony, that after 3 years the universe had given him the power to decide whether Alexandra Westbrook lived or died, and he'd chosen to save her. Not because she deserved it, but because he wasn't the kind of man who let people die just because they'd hurt him. 3 years earlier, Ethan had been a different man. He'd worn tailored shirts and steel-toed boots when he visited the production floor, carried a clipboard, and a reputation for being the engineer who wouldn't sign off on anything unless it was perfect. His team had respected him. His supervisors had trusted him, And when he discovered the cost-cutting measure buried in a revised procurement order, a 3% reduction in a critical fuel line alloy, he did exactly what he was supposed to do. He wrote a risk assessment memo, 16 pages annotated with stress calculations and failure mode projections. He sent it to quality assurance, to legal, to finance, and to the CEO's office. He followed up twice. He documented everything. Richard Bennett, the CFO, had been the one to respond. Ethan remembered the meeting vividly. Bennett's pale face, his sharp gray eyes, the way his tailored charcoal suit seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. "Your concerns are noted," Bennett had said, his voice smooth as polished marble. "But the engineering tolerance is well within acceptable limits. We're not compromising safety. We're optimizing efficiency." "Efficiency doesn't mean anything if a fuel line ruptures at altitude," Ethan had replied, holding his ground. Bennett had smiled then, a thin, humorless expression that never reached his eyes. "That's why we have redundancy protocols. This conversation is over, Reynolds." 2 weeks later, a pressure valve failed during a stress test in the fabrication wing. No injuries, no fire, just a loud pop, some smoke, and a scramble to shut down the line. It should have triggered a root cause analysis. Instead, it triggered a witch hunt. Ethan was called into HR on a Friday afternoon. They had a folder. Inside were emails, incident reports, and a memo he'd never seen before, one that accused him of violating safety protocols by running unauthorized tests. It was signed by Richard Bennett and countersigned by the head of legal. "This is fabricated," Ethan had said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. "I didn't run unauthorized tests. I flagged a legitimate safety risk." The HR manager, a thin woman with wire-rimmed glasses, hadn't met his eyes. "We've completed our investigation, Mr. Reynolds. The findings indicate gross negligence. Your employment is terminated effective immediately, and we'll be referring this matter to the state licensing board." "You can't be serious." She slid a termination letter across the table. At the bottom in digital blue ink was the signature, "Alexandra Westbrook, Chief Executive Officer." Ethan stared at it, disbelief warring with rage. She signed this, "All executive terminations require CEO approval." He picked up the letter, hands shaking. "I want to speak to her." "That won't be possible. Security will escort you out." And just like that, it was over. 15 years of work. A career built on integrity gone. The lawsuits came next. The company claimed damages. His engineering license was suspended pending review. And Sarah, his wife of 8 years, sat him down one night and said the words that broke him more than any termination letter ever could. "I can't do this anymore, Ethan. I can't watch you destroy yourself, fighting a battle you'll never win." She left, took half of what little they had left, and walked out. And Ethan was left with Lily, a stack of legal bills, and a choice: rage against the machine or rebuild. He chose to rebuild. Not because he'd forgiven, not because he'd forgotten, but because Lily was watching and he needed her to see that good men didn't quit just because the world was unjust. When Alexandra Westbrook woke in the ICU 2 days after the accident, the first thing she felt was pain, a dull, throbbing ache that radiated from her ribs and skull. The second thing she felt was confusion. White ceiling, beeping monitors, a tube in her nose. She tried to sit up and couldn't. A nurse appeared calm and efficient. "Easy, Ms. Westbrook. You're in the hospital. You were in a car accident. You're safe now." Alexandra's throat was dry, her voice raspy when she finally managed words. "What happened?" "You lost control on the Woodrow Wilson Bridge. Your car hit the guardrail. You went into cardiac arrest at the scene, but the paramedics brought you back. You're very lucky." Lucky. The word felt strange, foreign. Alexandra closed her eyes and tried to remember. Rain, headlights, the feeling of the wheel jerking out of her hands, and then nothing. "Who?" Her voice cracked. "Who saved me?" The nurse hesitated just briefly. "The paramedic who performed CPR. His name is Ethan Reynolds." The name hit her like cold water. Ethan Reynolds. She knew that name. She'd seen it somewhere recently in a file she couldn't quite place, but her head was too foggy, the pain too sharp. She let herself drift back into sleep. The next time she woke, the fog had lifted slightly. Dr. Bennett stood by her bed reviewing charts. "Welcome back, Ms. Westbrook. How are you feeling?" "Like I got hit by a truck." "Close enough. You've got 3 fractured ribs, a mild concussion, and some lacerations, but no internal bleeding. You'll recover fully with time and rest. Alexandra hesitated, then asked the question that had been lingering at the edge of her consciousness. Can I talk to him, the paramedic? Dr. Bennett's expression shifted just slightly. I'll see if he's available. An hour later, Ethan Reynolds stood in the doorway of her room, still in his uniform, his expression unreadable. Alexandra looked at him, really looked, and felt a jolt of recognition she couldn't explain. You saved my life, she said, her voice still rough. He stepped inside but kept his distance. I did my job. I want to thank you. You just did. There was something cold in his tone, something guarded. Alexandra frowned. Have we met before? Ethan's jaw tightened. You wouldn't remember. What does that mean? He didn't answer. Instead, he turned toward the door. Wait. Alexandra's voice was sharper now. Please, I owe you more than a thank you. If there's anything I can do. There's nothing you can do, Ethan said quietly. And then he walked out. Alexandra stared at the empty doorway, confusion, and something heavier settling in her chest. She reached for her phone, scrolled through her contacts, and called her assistant. I need a file. Personnel records from 3 years ago. Anyone named Ethan Reynolds. The file arrived 2 hours later, and as Alexandra read through the termination memo, the fabricated incident reports the legal maneuvering. Her hands started to shake. She saw her own signature at the bottom of the dismissal letter. She didn't remember signing it. She'd signed hundreds of documents that year, most of them auto-approved by her assistant based on recommendations from department heads. But this one had destroyed a man's life. She kept reading. Ethan Reynolds had been right. The cost-cutting measure had introduced risk. The incident hadn't been his fault, and Richard Bennett had orchestrated the entire cover-up using her signature as the final seal. Alexandra closed the file and pressed her palms against her eyes. She'd always told herself that tough decisions came with leadership, that she couldn't second-guess every termination, every restructuring, every cost analysis. But this wasn't a tough decision. This was a lie, and she'd signed her name to it. The door opened and a small voice said, "Are you the lady my dad saved?" Alexandra looked up. A little girl stood in the doorway, maybe 7 or 8, with dark curls and wide, curious eyes. She held a Tupperware container in both hands. Yes, Alexandra said. I am. What's your name? Lily Reynolds. She stepped closer, held out the container. I brought you pancakes. My dad says you need to eat to get strong again. Alexandra took the container, her throat tightening. Thank you, Lily. That's very kind. Lily tilted her head, studying Alexandra the way only children do, without pretense, without filter. My dad helps people. That's what heroes do. Alexandra felt something crack inside her chest. She looked at this little girl, at her homemade pancakes, and her simple, unshakable belief that her father was a hero, and realized with sickening clarity what she'd taken from them. Not just a job, not just a career, but security, stability. The kind of life where a 7-year-old didn't have to make pancakes for her father because they couldn't afford anything else. Your dad, Alexandra said softly, is absolutely a hero. Lily beamed. I know. She turned to leave, then paused. I hope you feel better soon. Thank you, Lily. When the door closed, Alexandra opened the Tupperware. The pancakes were slightly burnt, made with love and whatever ingredients a struggling family could afford. She took a bite, and it tasted like shame. She picked up her phone and called Richard Bennett. I want to see you. Now. When Alexandra was discharged 3 days later, she didn't go home. She went to her office, locked the door, and started pulling files. 3 years of financial reports, safety audits, personnel records, procurement orders. She worked through the night, cross-referencing data, following paper trails, and slowly, methodically building a picture of what Richard Bennett had done. And when dawn broke over Alexandria Harbor, Alexandra made a decision. She couldn't undo the past, but she could face it. She called Ethan Reynolds' number, found it in the paramedic dispatch records, and left a voicemail. Mr. Reynolds, this is Alexandra Westbrook. I know you don't want to hear from me, and I understand why, but I need to talk to you, not as a CEO, as someone who owes you more than an apology. Please give me a chance to make this right. Ethan didn't call back. She tried again the next day, and the day after that. On the 4th attempt, he finally answered. What do you want? His voice was flat, exhausted. I want to hire you, Alexandra said, as an independent safety consultant. 30 days full access to every file, every facility, every record. I'll pay you enough to cover 6 months of rent and legal fees to reinstate your engineering license. And when we're done, whatever we find good or bad goes public." Silence stretched across the connection. "Then why would you do that?" "Because you were right and I was wrong. And if I don't fix this, I'm no better than the people who buried you." More silence. "Then I have conditions." "Name them." "Full transparency, no NDAs, no gag orders. Whatever we find, I get to present it myself, and you don't interfere." "Agreed. And if I find evidence of criminal negligence, I go to the authorities. Not you, not your lawyers. Me." "Agreed." Ethan exhaled slowly. "When do we start?" "Tomorrow. Meet me at the fabrication plant, 7 a.m. "I'll be there." The next morning, Ethan walked into the Westbrook Aerospace fabrication plant for the first time in 3 years. The smell hit him first: metal oil, the sharp tang of welding torch. He'd spent a decade of his life in places like this, and the familiarity was both comforting and painful. Alexandra was waiting by the main floor entrance, dressed in jeans and a plain jacket, her hair pulled back, no makeup. She looked different from the polished CEO in the business magazines, smaller, more human. "Thank you for coming," she said. Ethan nodded. "Let's get to work." They spent the first week in records, pulling procurement orders, maintenance logs, incident reports. Ethan worked methodically, annotating discrepancies, flagging patterns. Alexandra watched, learned, asked questions. She didn't try to justify or defend. She just listened. On day 8, they moved to the production floor. Workers stared as they walked past. A few nodded at Ethan, older guys who remembered him, who knew what had happened. One man, a machinist named Eddie, stopped them. "Good to see you back, Reynolds," Eddie said. "A lot of us knew you got screwed." "Thanks, Eddie." "You going to fix it?" Eddie glanced at Alexandra. Ethan met her gaze briefly. "We're trying." They reviewed safety protocols, tested equipment, interviewed floor supervisors, and slowly the picture became clear. Richard Bennett had implemented a system of cost-saving measures that bypassed standard checks. He'd automated approvals, created financial incentives for managers who cut corners, and buried dissenting voices under layers of legal threats. But the smoking gun came on day 12 when Ethan found the macro, a script buried in the procurement software that automatically flagged high-temperature stress tests as optional if production volume fell below a certain threshold. It had been committed to the internal repository by Richard Bennett's user account 3 years ago, 2 weeks before Ethan's termination. Ethan showed Alexandra the code on his computer screen. "This is how he did it. He built the system to hide the risk, then blamed me when it failed." Alexandra stared at the screen, her face pale. "Can we trace this, prove it was deliberate?" "Already did. His digital signature is all over it. And I found payment records. He funneled money to a shell company called Platinum Consulting." Ethan paused. "Want to guess who owns it?" "Richard." "Bingo." Alexandra sat down heavily in the nearest chair. "He used me. He used my signature, my authority to cover his fraud." "Yeah," Ethan said. "He did." She looked up at Ethan. "I'm sorry. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I need you to know I didn't read that memo. I signed it because I trusted the system, and that was wrong." Ethan studied her. 3 years ago, he would have wanted to hear those words more than anything. Now they just felt heavy. "Apologies are easy. What are you going to do about it?" "Whatever it takes," Alexandra said, her voice firm, "even if it costs me everything." But Richard Bennett wasn't going to go quietly. On day 15, during a routine stress test in the fabrication wing, alarms started blaring. The temperature sensors spiked, indicating overheating in the fuel line assembly. Ethan ran toward the control panel, but the emergency shutoff wasn't responding. "Get everyone out," he shouted. Workers scrambled toward the exits. Alexandra, who'd been touring a side corridor, found herself cut off by a safety door that had automatically locked. Smoke began seeping through the vents. Ethan saw her through the reinforced glass, saw the panic in her eyes, and didn't hesitate. He grabbed a manual override key from the maintenance station, forced the door open, and pulled her into the main corridor. The sprinkler system kicked in, drenching them both. Ethan's forearm was red, blistered from where he'd shielded her from a burst of steam. "Are you okay?" he asked, breathing hard. She nodded, coughing. "You saved me again. Let's make sure there isn't a third time." Later, after the fire department cleared the building and declared it safe, Ethan found the source. A temperature sensor had been replaced with a faulty clone calibrated to trigger false readings. The serial number traced back to a supplier linked to Platinum Consulting. Richard tried to kill us, Alexandra said, her voice shaking. Or at least discredit us, Ethan replied. Make it look like I'm the problem. Then we go to the board. Now. No, Ethan's voice was firm. We go to the media and the authorities. If we try to handle this internally, Richard will spin it. We need transparency. Alexandra met his eyes. If we do this, the stock will crash. The board will try to remove me. I might lose everything. I know, Ethan said quietly, but it's the right thing to do. She took a breath, then nodded. Okay, let's do it right. The press conference was scheduled for the following Monday. Alexandra stood at a podium in front of a room packed with reporters, cameras, and Westbrook employees. Ethan stood off to the side, hands in his pockets, watching. Alexandra's voice was steady as she began. 3 years ago, Westbrook Aerospace made a decision that prioritized profit over safety. A senior engineer named Ethan Reynolds identified a critical risk in our fuel line systems and reported it through proper channels. Instead of addressing the risk, we buried it. We terminated Mr. Reynolds under false pretenses, destroyed his career, and endangered lives to protect our bottom line. The room erupted in murmurs. Cameras flashed. I signed the termination memo, Alexandra continued. I take full responsibility for that. I didn't read the details. I trusted a system that was designed to hide the truth. And in doing so, I failed not just Mr. Reynolds, but every worker in this company, every customer who trusted us, and every principle my father built this company on. She paused, her hands gripping the podium. Today, I'm announcing the immediate suspension of Chief Financial Officer Richard Bennett, pending a federal investigation into fraud, safety violations, and attempted sabotage. We're cooperating fully with authorities, and we're establishing the Westbrook Safety Trust, an independent fund dedicated to protecting whistleblowers and ensuring that no one at this company ever loses their job for telling the truth again. She looked directly at Ethan. Mr. Reynolds, I can't give you back the 3 years we took from you, but I can give you back your name. Today, Westbrook Aerospace publicly apologizes and commits to supporting your license reinstatement and compensating you for the harm we caused. The room exploded with questions, but Alexandra held up a hand. One more thing. Effective immediately, I'm stepping down as CEO. I'll remain on the board in an advisory capacity, but this company needs leadership that hasn't compromised its integrity. I won't be that person. Ethan watched her walk off the stage past the shouting reporters and out a side door. He found her 10 minutes later, sitting alone in a stairwell, her head in her hands. You didn't have to step down, he said quietly. She looked up, eyes red. Yes, I did. Why? Because I need to earn the right to lead, and I can't do that from the top. I have to start over like you did. Ethan sat down beside her. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Alexandra said, I'm sorry, I know I've said it before, but I need you to hear it. Not as a CEO, as a human being. I'm sorry for what I did to you and Lily. Ethan nodded slowly. I believe you. Does that mean you forgive me? He thought about it, about the 3 years of struggle, the nights Lily had cried because they couldn't afford things, the weight of carrying anger like a stone in his chest. And he thought about the moment in the ER when he'd had the choice to save her or let her die, and how easy it would have been to choose the latter. There are 2 kinds of people in this world, and he said finally, those who look away from pain because it's easier, and those who step toward it because it's right. Forgiveness isn't a switch, it's a process. But yeah, I'm working on it. Alexandra smiled, small and genuine. That's more than I deserve. Maybe, Ethan said, but it's what you're getting. In the weeks that followed, Richard Bennett was arrested. Federal investigators found evidence of fraud, embezzlement, and deliberate safety violations. The trial made headlines, and when he was led out of the courthouse in handcuffs, still wearing his tailored gray suit, the cameras captured every second. Ethan's engineering license was reinstated. The state board issued a formal apology, and job offers started rolling in, but Ethan didn't take them. Instead, he accepted a position as Director of Technical Operations for the newly established Westbrook Safety Trust. The trust's mission was simple: protect whistleblowers, fund independent safety audits, and ensure that companies couldn't silence the people who told the truth. It was the kind of work Ethan had always believed in, and now he had the resources to do it right. Alexandra took a leave of absence from Westbrook Industries and enrolled in an EMT training course. She showed up at the same ambulance station where Ethan worked, volunteering on community outreach programs, learning CPR, helping organize safety workshops at local schools. One afternoon, they found themselves teaching a first aid class at Lily's elementary school. The kids sat cross-legged on the gym floor, wide-eyed, as Ethan demonstrated chest compressions on a dummy. Alexandra knelt beside a little boy who was struggling to position his hands correctly, guiding him gently. "Like this, perfect," Alexandra said, smiling. Lily watched from the front row, her homemade bracelet glinting on her wrist, plastic beads spelling out truth, trust, and hope. When the class ended, she ran up to her father and threw her arms around him. "You were amazing, Dad." "We had a good assistant," Ethan said, glancing at Alexandra. Lily turned to Alexandra, studying her with that same unfiltered curiosity. "Are you going to keep helping people with my dad?" Alexandra crouched down to Lily's level. "If he'll let me." Lily looked at Ethan, then back at Alexandra. "I think you should. Heroes are better in teams." Later, as they walked along the riverfront, the autumn sun casting long shadows across the water, Alexandra said, I spent my whole life thinking leadership meant making hard decisions, but I was just making easy ones. The hard decision is admitting when you're wrong." Ethan watched a leaf drift downstream. "The hard decision is choosing to be better, even when no one's watching." Alexandra stopped walking, turned to face him. "I want to be better, not just at this job, but at life, at being human. And I think I need help with that." "What kind of help?" She smiled, a little nervous. "The kind where someone who knows what it's like to start over teaches me how to do it right." Ethan held her gaze. Over the past months, something had shifted between them. It wasn't forgiveness, not entirely. It was something quieter, deeper, trust earned in increments, respect built through action, and maybe, just maybe, the beginning of something more. "I think I can manage that," he said. A year later, the Westbrook Safety Trust held its first annual conference. Engineers, safety officers, and industry leaders gathered to share best practices, discuss new regulations, and honor whistleblowers who'd spoken up despite the cost. Ethan stood on stage delivering the keynote address. "Saving a life doesn't end with a pulse. It continues in the culture we build, the systems we create, the people we choose to protect. Every one of you has the power to save lives, not just in emergencies, but in boardrooms, on factory floors, in the decisions you make when no one's watching." The audience applauded. In the front row, Alexandra sat beside Lily, both of them beaming with pride. After the speech, Lily ran up and handed Ethan a new bracelet. "I added 2 more, she said, pointing to the beads. "Courage and hope." Ethan slipped it onto his wrist. "Perfect." That evening, there was another call, a cardiac arrest at a downtown restaurant. Ethan and Alexandra, now a certified EMT, and their team responded together. They worked in sync, each movement precise, each decision clear. When the patient's pulse returned, they locked eyes across the gurney, and Alexandra whispered, "You saved me twice. Let me spend my life saving with you." Ethan smiled. "I think we already are." The ambulance doors closed, the sirens wailed, and as they drove into the night, the city lights blurring past, two people who'd once been on opposite sides of a terrible mistake found themselves on the same side of something beautiful. A second chance. The sterile scent of disinfectant filled Alexandra Westbrook's hospital room, a stark contrast to the expensive perfume that usually surrounded her. Lying in bed with bandages and bruises, she stared at the personnel file in her hands, her mind struggling to process the implications of what she'd uncovered. The truth about Ethan Reynolds lay scattered across her lap in stark black and white. The fabricated reports, the rushed termination, her own signature, authorizing the destruction of a good man's career. 3 days had passed since she'd woken in this hospital bed. 3 days since she'd discovered that the paramedic who saved her life was someone whose life she had helped destroy. The coincidence felt too pointed to be random, as if the universe itself had orchestrated this confrontation with her own complicity. Alexandra pressed the call button, wincing as pain shot through her ribs. When the nurse appeared, she straightened her posture despite the discomfort. "I'd like to speak with Dr. Bennett, please, and I need to make some calls." The doctor arrived 15 minutes later, chart in hand. Alexandra cut straight to the point. "When can I be discharged?" "Ms. Westbrook, you suffered significant trauma. Your body needs time too." "I understand the medical implications, doctor, but I have urgent business that can't wait." Alexandra's voice carried the same authority she used in board meetings. I can recover just as well from my home office as I can hear. Dr. Bennett studied her with a clinical eye. I can release you tomorrow morning if your vital signs remain stable overnight, but you'll need to arrange for home care. No driving for at least 2 weeks, limited physical activity, and someone should stay with you for the first 72 hours. I'll make the arrangements. Alexandra reached for her phone, already scrolling through contacts. The doctor's conditions were inconvenient but negotiable. The truth she'd uncovered, however, demanded immediate action. After the doctor left, Alexandra called her assistant. Martin, I need you to clear my calendar for the next 3 days and find me everything you can on Richard Bennett, personal finances, property, holdings, investments, anything not in the company records. Her assistant's surprise was audible. Richard Bennett, our CFO. Yes, and I need discretion on this. Tell no one. Alexandra ended the call and stared out the window at the Alexandria skyline. 3 years ago, she had been newly appointed as CEO following her father's unexpected death. Overwhelmed by the responsibility, she'd relied heavily on the executive team her father had assembled, particularly Richard Bennett, the brilliant financial mind who had been her father's closest advisor for nearly 2 decades. She had trusted the system, trusted the signatures and approvals that crossed her desk, trusted that due diligence had been performed. Now a man's life had been ruined because of that trust, and Alexandra felt the weight of it pressing against her fractured ribs with each breath. Her phone buzzed with an incoming email from Martin, the first batch of information on Richard. She opened the files, skimming through financial statements, property records, and investment portfolios. On the surface, everything appeared legitimate for an executive of his status, but a pattern emerged in the timing of certain investments and property acquisitions, all following significant cost-cutting measures at Westbrook Aerospace. Alexandra flagged several transactions for deeper investigation, her mind now fully engaged in the hunt. She'd built her reputation on thorough analysis and strategic thinking. Now she would apply those same skills to uncovering the truth about Richard Bennett and making amends to Ethan Reynolds. The hospital released Alexandra the next morning. Martin had arranged for a private nurse and a car service to take her to her penthouse apartment overlooking the Potomac. As the elevator ascended to the top floor, Alexandra leaned against the wall, her body still weak, but her resolve strengthening with each passing hour. Her apartment felt foreign after her hospital stay, the minimalist luxury suddenly seeming cold rather than elegant. She settled at her desk, laptop open, determined to dig deeper into Richard's activities. Hours passed as she cross-referenced dates, followed money trails, and mapped connections. A pattern slowly emerged, one that pointed to a sophisticated scheme of procurement, manipulation, and quality control bypassing. Her phone rang, interrupting her concentration. It was Martin. Ms. Westbrook, I've located something unusual. Richard Bennett is listed as the principal owner of a consulting firm called Platinum Ventures. It's not in any of his disclosure forms. Alexandra's pulse quickened. Send me everything you have. Within minutes, her screen filled with corporate records for Platinum Ventures. The company had been established 4 years ago, right around the time Westbrook Aerospace had implemented its aggressive cost reduction strategy. More tellingly, Platinum had received multiple payments from suppliers who had won contracts with Westbrook, contracts that had been part of the cost-cutting initiative Richard had championed. The pieces were falling into place. Richard hadn't merely fired Ethan to cover up safety concerns. He'd been actively profiting from the compromised standards. The knowledge burned in Alexandra's chest, a mixture of rage and shame that overwhelmed the physical pain of her injuries. She picked up her phone again and dialed Ethan's number for the 5th time. Once again, the call went to voicemail. This time, she left a message. Mr. Reynolds, this is Alexandra Westbrook. I understand why you don't want to speak with me, but I've uncovered evidence that what happened to you was more than a corporate mistake. It was deliberate fraud. I need your help to make this right. Please call me back. Alexandra hung up and stared at the wall of financial data before her. The truth was emerging, but she needed Ethan's expertise to fully understand the technical implications. She needed the man whose life she'd helped destroy to now help her expose the corruption within her own company. The irony wasn't lost on her. The following morning, Alexandra received a text from an unknown number. Alexandria Central Park, 2 p.m., come alone. She knew immediately it was from Ethan. Despite her doctor's orders, she dismissed her nurse for the afternoon and called for a car. The pain medication made her drowsy, but she forced herself to stay alert as the car navigated through Alexandria's streets. The driver dropped her at the park entrance. Walking was still painful, but Alexandra refused to show weakness as she made her way to a bench overlooking the water. Ethan was already there, his back straight, eyes fixed on the horizon. He wore civilian clothes, jeans, and a weathered jacket, so different from the uniform he'd worn when he saved her life. Alexandra lowered herself carefully onto the bench beside him, leaving appropriate distance between them. "Thank you for meeting me." Ethan didn't look at her. "I'm not doing this for you." "I know. You're doing it because it's right." Alexandra opened her bag and removed a tablet. "I found evidence that Richard Bennett created a shell company to profit from the cost-cutting measures he implemented, including the fuel line alloy reduction you flagged." Ethan's eyes narrowed as she passed him the tablet. He scrolled through the financial records, his expression hardening with each swipe. "This connects the money, but we need more to prove he deliberately buried my safety concerns. That's why I need your help. You understand the technical aspects in a way I never could." Alexandra watched his face, searching for some sign of willingness to collaborate. "I'm prepared to offer you a consulting position. 30 days unrestricted access to company files, engineering systems, everything. Your findings go directly to me, no intermediaries." Ethan's laugh held no humor. "You want to hire the man your company destroyed. I want to hire the man who was right." Alexandra met his gaze directly. "And I'm willing to compensate you accordingly. 6 months' salary at your previous engineering rate plus funding for your license reinstatement process." Ethan's expression revealed nothing as he considered her offer. After a long moment, he handed the tablet back to her. "I'll need written authorization. Full access to all systems, including procurement code repositories. No oversight from current engineering management." "Done. And one more condition." Ethan's voice hardened. "Whatever we find goes public. All of it. No legal settlements with confidentiality clauses, no quiet resignations. The whole truth." Alexandra hesitated only briefly before nodding. "Agreed. When can you start?" "Tomorrow, 7 a.m. at the main facility." Ethan stood abruptly. "And Ms. Westbrook, this doesn't make us even. Nothing ever will." He walked away, leaving Alexandra alone on the bench. She hadn't expected forgiveness, didn't deserve it. But the cold determination in his eyes made it clear just how difficult this collaboration would be. Still, she had achieved her immediate goal. Ethan Reynolds would help her uncover the truth. Now she just had to ensure Richard Bennett didn't discover what they were doing before they had concrete evidence. The sun had barely crested the horizon when Alexandra arrived at the Westbrook Aerospace Manufacturing Facility the next morning. The early hour meant few employees were present, which suited their purpose. She waited in her car until she saw Ethan's truck pull into the parking lot, an older model Ford, well-maintained, but clearly showing its age. They entered the building together, Alexandra using her executive access card to bypass security protocols. The main floor was quiet, only the hum of essential systems breaking the silence. "We should start with the design documentation archives," Ethan suggested, his voice professional but distant. "I need to see the original specifications for the fuel line components and all revision histories." Alexandra nodded, leading him to the engineering department. She logged into a terminal with her administrative credentials. "You have full access now. I'll be in my office reviewing the financial trails if you need anything." Ethan didn't acknowledge her departure, already absorbed in the technical specifications on the screen. Alexandra lingered a moment watching him work. His focus was intense, hands moving with practiced efficiency across the keyboard. This was the engineer she had discarded without a second thought 3 years ago, brilliant, methodical, dedicated. In her office, Alexandra continued tracing Richard's financial web, looking for connections between Platinum Ventures and Westbrook's suppliers. The more she dug, the more disturbing the pattern became. Richard hadn't just created a single conflict of interest. He'd established an entire shadow operation that skimmed profits from compromised safety standards. Hours later, a knock at her door broke her concentration. Ethan entered without waiting for a response, a flash drive in his hand. "I found something." He inserted the drive into her computer and pulled up a series of technical documents. "These are the original engineering specifications for the fuel line components. And these," he opened another file, "are the modified specifications that were implemented 3 years ago. The alloy composition was altered to reduce manufacturing costs by approximately 2.3%. Alexandra leaned forward, struggling to interpret the technical data. "And this change caused the safety issue you reported." The change itself wasn't necessarily catastrophic in isolation, but when combined with the operational parameters we were testing under, it created a significant risk of failure. Ethan pulled up another file. This is my original risk assessment report. And this, he opened yet another document, is what was presented to you for sign-off on my termination. Alexandra compared the documents side by side. The technical language in both was similar enough to appear related, but the conclusions were dramatically different. Her original report had flagged potential catastrophic failure modes. The altered version described protocol violations and unauthorized testing. Someone doctored my report, Ethan said flatly. They took my technical language and twisted it into evidence against me. Richard, Alexandra murmured, the realization settling like ice in her veins. Not just Richard, he couldn't have done this alone. Ethan pointed to several validation signatures on the altered document. Someone in engineering had to collaborate, and legal had to know what they were doing when they processed my termination. The implications staggered Alexandra. This wasn't just one corrupt executive. It was systemic rot within her company's leadership. We need to find out who else was involved. More importantly, we need to determine if these compromised standards are still in place. Ethan's voice held renewed urgency. If they are, every aircraft with these components is at risk. Alexandra's phone buzzed with a text from Martin. Are asking questions about your research. Wants meeting tomorrow, 9 a.m. She showed the message to Ethan, who frowned. He's getting suspicious. We need to move faster. I'll delay the meeting. Tell him I'm still recovering. Alexandra typed a quick response to Martin. You keep digging into the technical side. I'll focus on building the financial case. Ethan nodded, the first moment of genuine accord between them. I'll need access to the current production floor tomorrow. Need to verify if the compromised components are still being manufactured. I'll arrange it, early again before the main shift. Alexandra hesitated. Thank you for doing this. Ethan's expression remained neutral. I'm not doing it for you. I'm doing it for every passenger who boards an aircraft with our components, and for every engineer who might face what I did for telling the truth. The truth in his words stung, but Alexandra accepted it with a nod. Fair enough. That evening, Alexandra returned to her apartment physically and emotionally drained. The pain medication had worn off hours ago, and her ribs throbbed with each breath. As she settled onto her couch with a glass of water and her pain pills, her doorbell rang. Warily, she approached the door and checked the security camera. A small figure stood in the hallway. Lily Reynolds, Ethan's daughter, holding what appeared to be a covered dish. A woman Alexandra didn't recognize waited a few steps behind her. Alexandra opened the door, confusion evident on her face. Lily, the girl smiled brightly. Hi, Miss Westbrook. Dad said you're helping him with an important project and that you got hurt in an accident. I made you dinner because it's hard to cook when you're hurt. Stunned, Alexandra glanced at the woman behind Lily, who stepped forward with an apologetic smile. I'm Mrs. Diaz, their neighbor. Ethan asked if I could bring Lily by on our way home from her piano lesson. She was very insistent about delivering this herself. Alexandra accepted the covered dish emotion, tightening her throat. That's incredibly thoughtful, Lily. Would you like to come in for a minute? Lily nodded eagerly while Mrs. Diaz checked her watch. We can stay for just a few minutes. Ethan's expecting her home for homework time. Alexandra led them into her living room, suddenly self-conscious about the sterile luxury of her apartment. There were no personal touches, no family photos, no evidence of a life beyond work. Lily, however, seemed impressed. Wow, you can see the whole city from here. Dad says we live in a shoebox compared to most places, but I think our apartment is just right. I bet it's very cozy, Alexandra replied, setting the dish on her coffee table. It is, and I have my own room with stars on the ceiling. Dad painted them for me after we moved. They glow in the dark. Lily's enthusiasm was infectious. He says when he fixes the truck, we're going to go camping and see real stars. Have you ever been camping, Miss Westbrook? Alexandra shook her head, caught off guard by the simple question. No, I haven't. You should come with us sometime. Dad knows all the constellations and tells the best stories about them. Mrs. Diaz checked her watch again. Lily, we should head back. Your father will be waiting. Lily nodded, then turned back to Alexandra. It's lasagna, Dad's recipe, but I helped a lot. I hope you feel better soon. After they left, Alexandra stood in her silent apartment, the covered dish of homemade lasagna sitting on her coffee table like an artifact from another world. She lifted the lid, and the aroma of tomato sauce and cheese filled the air. Simple comforting, made with care despite limited means. The contrast between Lily's life and her own struck Alexandra with unexpected force. This little girl whose family had been devastated by Alexandra's carelessness had still brought her dinner. What kind of man was Ethan Reynolds to raise a child with such compassion in the face of injustice? And what kind of person had Alexandra become that such a simple act of kindness could leave her so undone? She ate the lasagna, slowly savoring each bite. It wasn't gourmet, but it tasted better than any meal she'd had in months because it had been made with genuine care rather than professional obligation. Alexandra's phone rang as she was finishing her appeal. It was Martin, his voice tense. Ms. Westbrook, there's been unusual activity on your executive account. Someone's been tracking your system access patterns, specifically what files you've been reviewing. Alexandra set down her fork. When did this start? The monitoring program was installed yesterday afternoon while you were out of the office. Richard, Alexandra whispered the name like ash on her tongue. Most likely. Should I disable it? Alexandra considered her options quickly. No, let it run. In fact, use my credentials to access some routine operational files. Make it look like I'm conducting a standard quarterly review. Understood. And what about your other research? Wrote it through the secure server we use for acquisition planning. Richard doesn't have access to that system. Alexandra paused. And Martin, be careful. If Richard suspects you're helping me, I understand the risks, Ms. Westbrook. His voice carried quiet determination. My father worked on the production floor for 30 years. If there are safety issues being covered up, I want them exposed as much as you do. After ending the call, Alexandra messaged Ethan. Our monitoring system access. Use secure acquisition server tomorrow. Access card in your name will be waiting at security. His response came quickly. Understood. Found more evidence today. Need to show you tomorrow. 6 a.m., not 7. Alexandra set her alarm, then finished her dinner, her mind racing with implications. Richard was already suspicious. If he discovered what they were doing before they had compiled enough evidence, he would find a way to bury it in them, just as he had buried Ethan's safety concerns 3 years ago. The stakes had just escalated dramatically. Alexandra arrived at the facility at 5:45 the next morning to ensure she could circumvent security protocols for Ethan's arrival. The building was nearly empty, with only essential night shift personnel present. Ethan arrived precisely at 6 a.m., his expression grim. I spent half the night reviewing the current production specifications. The compromised alloy is still in use, but that's not the worst of it. He led her to a secure terminal in the engineering department and inserted a flash drive. I cross-referenced the failure incident reports for the past 3 years. There have been 17 documented instances of component failure in testing, all with the same signature characteristics I flagged in my original report. Alexandra stared at the screen, a chill spreading through her chest. Were any aircraft affected? Not yet. All failures occurred during ground testing or early inspection phases. Ethan pulled up another file. But the tolerance margins are narrowing. It's only a matter of time before an in-service failure occurs. We need to implement an immediate quality hold, Alexandra said, reaching for her phone. Ethan caught her wrist, stopping her. Not yet. If you suddenly halt production without explanation, Richard will know exactly what we're doing. We need more evidence connecting him directly to the cover-up. Alexandra reluctantly lowered her phone, recognizing the logic in his caution. What do you suggest? We need to access the procurement system's code repository. If Richard inserted routines to bypass quality checks or auto-approve substandard materials, the evidence will be there. Ethan released her wrist. But that requires higher access than even your credentials provide. We need a system administrator. Alexandra thought for a moment. I know someone who might help. The head of IT security, Daniel Kwan. He was my father's hire, not Richard's. If anyone would be willing to help us without raising alarms, it's him. She sent a text to Daniel requesting an urgent private meeting. His response came within minutes, agreeing to meet them in the server room. Daniel arrived 20 minutes later, his expression curious as he took in the unlikely pair of the CEO and a man he didn't recognize. Ms. Westbrook, how can I help? Alexandra performed brief introductions, then explained the situation in careful terms. We have reason to believe the procurement system has been compromised to bypass quality control protocols. We need to examine the code repository for unauthorized modifications, specifically around the time Mr. Reynolds was terminated. Daniel's eyes widened slightly as he processed the implications. This is about the fuel line alloy issue from 3 years ago. Ethan tensed beside her. You knew about that? I didn't know details, but there were rumors. Daniel met Ethan's gaze directly. I always thought it was strange how quickly they shut down your concerns. It didn't align with normal safety protocols. Will you help us? Alexandra pressed. Daniel hesitated only briefly. This could cost me my job. If what we suspect is true, a lot more than jobs are at stake, Ethan said quietly. After a moment's consideration, Daniel nodded. I'll help, but we need to be smart about this. The repository has access logs that would immediately flag unusual activity. Can you bypass them? Alexandra asked. Not without leaving traces, but Daniel thought for a moment. I can create a scenario where accessing those logs would appear legitimate. We're due for a security audit next month. I could initiate a preliminary scan as part of preparation procedures. Ethan nodded appreciatively. That would work. For the next hour, they watched as Daniel navigated through layers of system security, methodically creating a digital trail that would withstand scrutiny. Finally, he accessed the code repository for the procurement system. What exactly am I looking for? Daniel asked, fingers poised over the keyboard. Ethan leaned forward. Search for modifications to the quality control validation routines specifically for high-temperature alloys. The changes would likely have been implemented shortly before my termination date. Daniel typed rapidly, navigating through the repository with practiced ease. There, a major code update was committed 3 weeks before your termination. The author is R. Bennett. Ethan's expression hardened as he studied the code. He inserted a conditional bypass. If production quotas fell behind schedule, the system would automatically downgrade certain quality tests from mandatory to optional. Can you download the complete code revision history? Alexander asked. Daniel nodded. Already doing it. I'm routing it through multiple security layers to mask the activity. As they waited for the download to complete, Alexandra's phone buzzed with a text from Martin. R asking about your whereabouts. Says he needs urgent meeting when you arrive. Alexandra showed the message to Ethan, whose jaw tightened. He's getting nervous. We need to move faster. The download's complete, Daniel announced, removing a flash drive from the terminal. I've included all commit logs and code diffs for the past 4 years. If there's evidence of tampering, it's in here. Alexandra took the drive, relief washing over her. Thank you, Daniel. This stays between us for now. Of course, Daniel hesitated. Ms. Westbrook, if what you suspect is true, there could be serious legal implications for the company, not to mention the safety concerns. I'm aware. That's why we're pursuing this so carefully. Alexandra met his gaze steadily. I promise you appropriate action will be taken once we have all the facts. After Daniel left, Ethan and Alexandra retreated to a small conference room to review the code repository findings. Hours passed as Ethan methodically documented the changes Richard had implemented, building a comprehensive timeline of the safety compromises and subsequent cover-up. He didn't just bury my report, Ethan said, voice tight with controlled anger. He systematically dismantled the entire quality validation process for these components. And then he made me the scapegoat when the inevitable problems started occurring. Alexandra studied the evidence before her, each new revelation deepening her sense of horror and complicity. I signed off on all of this. I never questioned why we were terminating one of our most respected engineers. You were new, overwhelmed. He counted on that. Ethan's words weren't meant as absolution, merely as fact. That doesn't excuse it. I should have asked questions. Should have read the reports myself instead of trusting the summaries. Alexandra closed her eyes briefly. My father would never have allowed this. Maybe, maybe not. Ethan's voice held an edge. Richard's scheme started while your father was still CEO. He laid the groundwork long before you took over. The implication hung in the air between them. Had her father been complicit or merely deceived as she had been? Alexandra pushed the troubling question aside. There would be time to confront her father's legacy later. Right now, they needed to focus on building an ironclad case against Richard Bennett. Her phone rang Richard's direct line. Alexandra stared at the screen, then at Ethan. I should answer. If I keep avoiding him, he'll become even more suspicious. Ethan nodded reluctantly. Just be careful what you say. Alexandra accepted the call, keeping her voice professionally neutral. Richard, good morning. I understand you have been looking for me. Alexandra. His voice carried the smooth authority that had once reassured her. Now it sent warning signals through her nervous system. I was concerned. You've been quite elusive since your accident, and I noticed you've been accessing some unusual files. Is everything all right? Just catching up on areas I've neglected, she replied evenly. The accident gave me perspective on how much I've been delegating. I want to have a more hands-on approach moving forward. A brief pause. I see. Well, I'd like to discuss some pressing financial matters. The quarterly projections need your approval, and there are several capital allocation decisions pending. Of course, I'll meet with you this afternoon. My calendar is clear after 2. Perfect. My office at 2:30 then. Richard's tone remained pleasant, but Alexandra detected the underlying tension. Oh, and Alexandra, I heard a rumor that you've brought in an outside consultant, someone working in engineering. Alexandra's blood ran cold, but she kept her voice steady. Yes, I'm conducting a comprehensive safety review following my accident. Fresh eyes, no institutional bias. Interesting approach. I'd like to meet this consultant. I'm sure you would. I'll see if I can arrange it. Alexandra ended the call, her hand trembling slightly as she set down the phone. He knows something's happening. But he doesn't know what we've found, Ethan countered. We need to secure the evidence we've gathered. Make copies, store them in multiple locations. Alexandra nodded. I'll have Martin handle that. And I should meet with Richard as planned, keep him thinking I'm just being unusually thorough rather than specifically investigating him. It's dangerous. He's already suspicious. If I suddenly cancel, he'll know for certain something's wrong. Alexandra stood wincing as her still healing ribs protested the movement. I can handle Richard Bennett. I've been doing it for 3 years. Ethan's expression revealed his doubt, but he nodded. While you're meeting with him, I'll continue analyzing the code repository data. We still need to establish a direct connection between the compromised components and Platinum Ventures. Be careful. Use only the secure terminal and don't let anyone see what you're working on. Alexandra gathered her things, preparing to return to her office. If Richard suspects how much we know, I understand the risks. Ethan's gaze was steady. Do you? The question lingered as Alexandra made her motion back to her office. Did she truly understand what they were up against, Richard? Bennett wasn't just a corrupt executive. He was a man who had meticulously constructed a fraud that endangered lives and had destroyed at least one career to protect it. What would he do if he realized Alexandra was close to exposing him? She spent the next few hours preparing for her meeting with Richard, reviewing legitimate quarterly projections to maintain her cover story, while Martin discreetly made copies of their evidence. At precisely 2:30, she walked into Richard's office, her expression carefully composed. Richard rose from behind his desk, the perfect image of corporate leadership in his tailored suit. At 52, he maintained the lean physique and confident bearing that had served him well throughout his career. His smile appeared genuine as he gestured toward the chair across from his desk. Alexandra, please sit. How are you feeling? That was quite an accident. Improving daily, thank you. Alexandra settled into the chair, maintaining the poised demeanor expected of a CEO despite the tension coiling in her stomach. You mentioned quarterly projections. Always straight to business. Richard chuckled, retrieving a folder from his desk. Before we dive in, I wanted to ask about this safety review you've initiated. It seems rather extensive. Alexandra met his gaze without flinching. The accident was a wake-up call. I realized I've been too removed from operational details. My father always maintained a hands-on approach to quality and safety. I intend to honor that legacy. Your father was certainly meticulous. Something flickered in Richard's eyes, a calculation, a reassessment. But he also understood when to delegate. You can't possibly review every system personally, which is why I've brought in specialized help. Alexandra kept her tone casual. Fresh perspectives can be invaluable. Indeed, Richard leaned back slightly. This consultant of yours, former military, I hear, interesting choice for a technical review. The deliberate mischaracterization confirmed Alexandra's suspicions. Richard was fishing for information, trying to determine how much she knew about Ethan's true identity. He has the precise expertise we need, she replied smoothly. Now about those projections. For the next hour, they discussed legitimate business matters with Richard presenting financial forecasts and capital allocation proposals. Alexandra participated, fully approving some recommendations and questioning others, maintaining the appearance of normal operations. As their meeting concluded, Richard walked her to the door, his hand coming to rest lightly on her shoulder. Alexandra, I hope you know you can come to me with any concerns. We've been through a lot together, your father's passing, your transition to CEO. I consider myself not just your CFO, but a friend and advisor. The sincerity in his voice was perfect, practiced, polished over decades of corporate maneuvering. 3 weeks ago, Alexandra might have been reassured by it. Now, knowing what she did, the gentle pressure of his hand felt like a threat. I appreciate that, Richard, more than you know. She smiled, matching his false sincerity with her own. I'll see you at tomorrow's executive committee meeting. The moment she left his office, Alexandra texted Ethan. Meeting complete, are suspicious but doesn't know details. Status update. His response came quickly. Found direct connection. Platinum Ventures supplied certification for alloy testing when original vendor rejected materials. Meeting in 30 min to show you. Alexandra headed toward the designated meeting spot, her mind racing. They were close to having all the evidence they needed. Just a few more pieces to connect, and they could take action against Richard. She never made it to the meeting. As she rounded the corner toward the engineering department, alarms began blaring throughout the facility. Red emergency lights flashed, and the automated evacuation announcement echoed through the corridors. Attention all personnel. A safety incident has been detected in Section C. Please proceed to your designated evacuation points immediately. This is not a drill. Section C, the fabrication wing, where they were conducting stress tests on the fuel line components. The same components Ethan had identified as compromised. Alexandra broke into a run and, ignoring the pain in her ribs moving against the flow of evacuating employees. She had to find Ethan, had to make sure he was safe. As she approached the fabrication wing, smoke billowed from the testing area. Through the reinforced observation windows, she could see technicians in protective gear working frantically to contain what appeared to be an overheating testing apparatus. There was no sign of Ethan. Alexandra tried calling his phone, but the call went straight to voicemail. She approached a security officer directing the evacuation. I'm looking for a consultant, Ethan Reynolds. He might have been in the testing area. The officer checked his tablet. No one by that name has badged into Section C today, ma'am, but we're still accounting for all personnel. Relief washed over her quickly, followed by renewed concern. If Ethan wasn't in the testing area, where was he? And what had caused the safety incident? Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Northeast stairwell, now alone. Alexandra moved quickly, slipping past security personnel focused on the evacuation. The northeast stairwell was deserted, emergency lighting, casting everything in an eerie red glow. Ethan emerged from the shadows, his expression grim. It wasn't an accident. What happened? Someone replaced the test control module with a modified unit programmed to override safety protocols. The system was designed to push the components past failure point. Ethan's voice was tight with controlled fury. I was supposed to be observing that test. I got delayed reviewing some code logs. The implication struck Alexandra like a physical blow. Richard tried to kill you. Not just me, anyone in that testing area. Ethan held up a small device. I managed to pull the controller before security locked down the area. The sabotage is obvious once you know what to look for, and I'd bet anything it traces back to Platinum Ventures. We need to go to the authorities. Now, before Richard realizes we have this evidence. Ethan nodded grimly. We don't have much time. Once he learns the test didn't kill me, he'll try something else. Alexandra felt a cold certainty settling over her. My car is in the executive garage. We can leave without going through the main security checkpoint. As they made their way toward the garage, Alexandra's phone rang. Richard's number. She showed the screen to Ethan, who nodded for her to answer. Richard, she said, keeping her voice calm despite her racing heart. Alexandra, where are you? There's been a serious incident in the testing lab. Everyone's been ordered to evacuate. His concern sounded genuine, which only heightened the menace behind it. I'm heading to my car now. I was in a meeting when the alarm sounded. Stay there, I'll come to you. The command was subtle but unmistakable. No need, I'm already outside. Alexandra forced lightness into her tone. I'll check in with emergency services and then head home. Doctor's orders, I'm still recovering after all. A pause. Of course, we'll debrief tomorrow once we have more information about what happened. Alexandra ended the call as they reached her car. He's looking for us. Then let's not be here when he finds us. Ethan slid into the passenger seat, the controller clutched in his hand. FBI field office. It's time to end this. As Alexandra pulled out of the garage, she glanced in her rearview mirror and saw Richard standing at the entrance watching their departure. His expression was unreadable at this distance, but she felt the weight of his gaze like a physical threat. They had the evidence. They were on their way to the authorities. But Richard Bennett was not a man who would go down without a fight. And the most dangerous predators were those who had nothing left to lose. Richard Bennett's sleek black Mercedes peeled out of the Westbrook Aerospace parking garage minutes after Alexandra and Ethan departed. In the rearview mirror of her BMW, Alexandra caught a glimpse of his vehicle merging into traffic several cars behind them. "He's following us," she said, tightening her grip on the steering wheel. Ethan glanced back, his expression hardening. "Take the next right, then an immediate left. Let's see if it's coincidence or pursuit." Alexandra executed the maneuvers, navigating through Alexandria's streets with precision, despite her still healing injuries. Richard's Mercedes followed the same pattern, maintaining distance, but clearly tracking their movements. "So much for coincidence," Ethan muttered. He pulled out his phone, took a photo of the trailing vehicle, then dialed a number. "This is Ethan Reynolds. I need to speak with Agent Michaels immediately." "Yes, I'll hold." Alexandra accelerated onto the highway, merging into the flow of traffic. "Who's Agent Michaels?" "FBI contact from when I first tried to report the safety violations 3 years ago. He couldn't help then, not enough evidence. But he gave me his direct line in case I ever found more." Ethan's voice lowered as someone answered. "Agent Michaels, it's Ethan Reynolds. We're en route to your office with evidence of corporate fraud and attempted murder at Westbrook Aerospace. We're also being followed by the CFO, Richard Bennett." "Yes, that's correct." "Understood." He ended the call, turning to Alexandra. "He's sending a patrol car to intercept us. We need to reach the exit for their field office. Can you make it?" "I'll make it," Alexandra assured him, changing lanes to pass a slow-moving truck. Her ribs throbbed with each breath, but adrenaline dulled the pain. This wasn't just about corporate malfeasance anymore. Richard had tried to kill Ethan, would have killed anyone in that testing area. The stakes had escalated beyond anything she had imagined when she first uncovered the discrepancies in Ethan's termination. 2 miles from the FBI office exit, a black SUV appeared beside Richard's Mercedes. It swerved suddenly, forcing Richard onto the shoulder. Through her mirror, Alexandra watched as 2 unmarked vehicles boxed in the Mercedes, bringing it to a stop. "That's our escort," Ethan said, relief evident in his voice. "We're clear to the field office." 15 minutes later, they sat in a conference room at the FBI field office, laying out their evidence for Agent Michaels and his team. The tampered test controller sat in an evidence bag at the center of the table, surrounded by printouts of financial records linking Richard to Platinum Ventures and documentation of the code changes that had systematically dismantled safety protocols. "And you believe Mr. Bennett orchestrated today's testing incident specifically to target Mr. Reynolds?" Agent Michaels clarified, his expression grave. "The timing is too precise to be coincidence," Alexandra confirmed. "Ethan was scheduled to observe that test. The only reason he wasn't present when the component failed catastrophically was a last-minute discovery in the code logs." Agent Michaels studied the evidence before him. "We'll need formal statements from both of you, and we'll need to coordinate with NTSB regarding the aircraft safety implications." "And what about Richard? He knows we have evidence against him." Alexandra couldn't shake the image of Richard's Mercedes pursuing them through the streets of Alexandria. "And he has connections throughout the company. He could destroy evidence before you can secure it. We've detained Mr. Bennett for questioning, and a team is already en route to Westbrook Aerospace with warrants for company servers and financial records." Agent Michaels slid formal statement forms across the table. "The sooner we complete your statements, the faster we can move on formal charges." For the next 3 hours, Alexandra and Ethan provided detailed accounts of everything they had uncovered, from the original safety concerns 3 years ago through the financial fraud, code tampering, and culminating in the sabotage test. As they finished, Ethan's phone rang. He frowned at the number. "It's my neighbor, Mrs. Diaz." He answered quickly, his expression shifting from concern to alarm. "When did they identify themselves? Is she okay?" No, don't go back to the apartment. Take her to the address I'm texting you. I'll meet you there. He hung up already on his feet. Someone tried to break into my apartment. Mrs. Diaz had taken Lily to the park, but they saw men leaving the building as they returned. Alexandra stood immediately. Richard's people. Agent Michaels was already making calls. We'll send officers to secure the location and escort your neighbor and daughter to a safe house. I need to go to them, Ethan insisted, gathering his things. Lily will be terrified. I'm coming with you, Alexandra said without hesitation. The thought of that little girl in danger because of her company's corruption sent a wave of nausea through her. This is my responsibility too. Agent Michaels arranged for an escort to take them to the designated safe house, a nondescript hotel on the outskirts of the city. As they drove, Ethan's tension was palpable, his jaw, tight hands clenched into fists on his knees. She'll be okay, Alexandra said softly. The FBI is protecting her. She's 7 years old, Ethan replied, voice strained. She doesn't understand any of this. All she knows is that bad men came to our home. Alexandra had no response to that. What could she possibly say to mitigate the terror Richard had inflicted on an innocent child? This was the collateral damage of her corporate negligence, not just compromised aircraft components, but a little girl's sense of safety shattered. When they arrived at the hotel, Mrs. Diaz was waiting in the lobby with Lily, who launched herself into her father's arms the moment he entered. Ethan lifted her, holding her close, murmuring reassurances as she buried her face against his shoulder. The men didn't look like normal people, Lily's small voice carried in the quiet lobby. They wore suits like the ones you used to wear when you worked at the big company, but they looked angry. You're safe now, Ethan assured her, stroking her hair. And you were very smart to go with Mrs. Diaz instead of going home. Lily nodded against his shoulder, then noticed Alexandra standing nearby. Her eyes widened in recognition. Ms. Westbrook, did the angry men come to see you too? Alexandra approached, carefully conscious of Ethan's protective stance. Something like that, Lily. But don't worry, the police are making sure those men can't bother anyone else. Mrs. Diaz provided additional details to the FBI agents' descriptions of the men, the vehicle they'd seen, the timing of events. Once she'd completed her statement, Agent Michaels addressed both Ethan and Alexandra. We've arranged rooms for you here tonight. There will be agents posted in the hallway and lobby. Tomorrow we'll need you both back at the field office to review additional evidence our teams have secured from Westbrook. After the agents departed, leaving only the security detail, an awkward silence fell over the small group. Ethan still held Lily close, reluctant to let her go, even for a moment. I should let you get settled, Alexandra said, stepping back toward the elevator. I'll see you in the morning. Wait, Lily called, wiggling to be set down. She approached Alexandra, looking up with solemn eyes. Are you scared too? The simple question caught Alexandra off guard. Was she scared? The adrenaline had masked it, but beneath the surface churned a maelstrom of fear, guilt, and uncertainty. Yes, she admitted, I am scared. When I'm scared, Daddy makes me hot chocolate and tells me stories until I feel better. Lily glanced back at her father, then to Alexandra again. Maybe you could have hot chocolate with us, so you're not scared alone. The innocent offer pierced Alexandra's practiced corporate armor. This child, whose life had been upended by her company's corruption, was offering comfort to the very person whose negligence had enabled it all. Ethan knelt beside his daughter. That's very kind of you to offer, Lee, but Ms. Westbrook might want some time to herself. Actually, Alexandra said softly, hot chocolate sounds perfect right now. An hour later, they sat in Ethan's hotel room, sipping from steaming mugs, while Lily recounted her day at school, the unexpected crisis momentarily set aside through the resilience of childhood. When she finally drifted to sleep, nestled against her father's side, Ethan carefully shifted her to the bed and joined Alexandra by the window. Thank you, he said quietly, for staying. It helped distract her. Alexandra stared into her empty mug. Your daughter has more compassion than most adults I know. She shouldn't have to deal with any of this. No, she shouldn't. Ethan's voice held no accusation, just tired acknowledgement. But here we are. I'll make this right, Ethan. Not just the fraud and safety issues, but what happened to you, to your family. Alexandra set down her mug, meeting his gaze directly. I can't give you back those 3 years, but I can ensure you have a security going forward. That's not why I'm doing this. I know. You're doing it because it's right, because people's lives are at risk. Alexandra glanced at Lily peacefully asleep. But when this is over, I want you to know that Westbrook Aerospace will acknowledge the harm done and make appropriate restitution. Ethan studied her for a long moment. 3 years ago, I would have given anything to hear those words. Now, he shook his head. Now I just want my daughter to feel safe again. The simple truth of his statement hung between them, a reminder that some damages could never be fully repaired. Morning brought new developments. Agent Michaels called early requesting their immediate presence at the field office. The FBI had conducted overnight raids at Richard's residence and several Platinum Ventures locations. We've secured substantial evidence, Michaels informed them when they arrived. Financial records confirming kickbacks from suppliers' communications regarding the fabricated case against Mr. Reynolds and most damning detailed instructions for yesterday's testing sabotage. What about Richard? Alexandra asked. In custody, but not talking. His lawyers arrived within an hour of his detention. Michaels spread photographs across the table, images of documents, computer screens, handwritten notes. We've also identified 3 other executives who appear to be involved, including your head of legal and the engineering director. Ethan examined the photos, his expression darkening. Marcus Holden. He was my direct supervisor. He signed off on all my safety assessments. According to the evidence, he received substantial payments through offshore accounts linked to Platinum Ventures. Michael slid another photo forward, a screenshot of a bank transfer. 2 days after your termination, $500,000 was deposited into his Cayman Islands account. Alexandra felt physically ill. The corruption ran deeper than she had imagined, infiltrating multiple levels of her executive team. What happens now? We're building the case for criminal charges, fraud, reckless endangerment, and attempted murder for yesterday's incident. Michaels gathered the photos. But there's another urgent matter. The NTSB has conducted an emergency review of the documentation and determined that all aircraft currently using the compromised components need immediate inspection and potential grounding. Ethan straightened. How many aircraft are we talking about? Preliminary estimate is between 300 and 400 commercial aircraft worldwide. Michael's tone was grim. Westbrook needs to issue a safety alert immediately and coordinate with the airlines and regulatory authorities. I'll call an emergency board meeting, Alexandra said, already reaching for her phone. We need to get ahead of this before the news breaks publicly. There's one more thing you should know, Michaels added. Richard Bennett was recording your conversations. We found surveillance equipment in your office, in his. He was building a counter-narrative planning to frame you as the architect of the safety compromises if he was ever exposed. The revelation shouldn't have surprised Alexandra, yet it still sent a chill through her. Richard had been methodically covering his tracks from the beginning, creating layers of protection and deflection. How long had he been planning this? Had her father suspected anything before his death? The emergency board meeting convened virtually 2 hours later. Alexandra appeared on screen from a secure room at the FBI field office, flanked by Agent Michaels and Ethan. The board members' faces registered shock as she laid out the evidence of fraud, the safety violations, and the criminal investigation underway. We must issue an immediate safety alert to all airlines operating aircraft with the affected components, Alexandra concluded, and we need to establish a crisis response team to coordinate inspections and replacements. The board's lead director, Eleanor Fitzgerald, spoke first. This is catastrophic, Alexandra. The financial implications alone. With respect, Director Fitzgerald, Alexandra interrupted, our first concern must be safety, not stock price. People could die if we don't act immediately. I agree, said another director, Thomas Chen. We have an ethical and legal obligation to disclose this information and rectify the danger. The question is how we proceed from here, given that our CEO, CFO, and several other executives are implicated. I take full responsibility for the governance failures that allowed this to happen, Alexandra said firmly. As CEO, the ultimate accountability rests with me. But right now, our priority must be correcting the safety issues. I propose appointing Mr. Reynolds as special advisor to lead the technical response. He identified these problems 3 years ago and has the expertise we need. Several board members looked skeptical. Eleanor spoke again. The same engineer who was terminated for safety violations, that would be a stunning reversal of position. He was terminated based on fraudulent evidence, Alexandra clarified. The FBI investigation has confirmed that Mr. Reynolds was correct all along and was silenced precisely because he identified these risks. After intense discussion, the board approved the immediate safety alert and the appointment of Ethan as special advisor. They also established an independent committee to oversee the company's cooperation with federal investigators and to assess leadership changes needed in light of the scandal. As the meeting concluded, Alexandra felt a strange mixture of relief and dread. The immediate danger to aircraft had been addressed, but the public revelation of Westbrook's corruption would soon follow. Her company, her father's legacy, would face a reckoning unlike anything in its history. The next 48 hours passed in a blur of activity. The safety alert triggered worldwide inspections of affected aircraft. Several airlines proactively grounded their fleets pending evaluation. Regulatory agencies in multiple countries launched investigations. The financial markets reacted swiftly and brutally, with Westbrook's stock losing nearly 40% of its value in a single day. Meanwhile, the FBI investigation expanded. Richard and 3 other executives were formally charged with fraud, conspiracy, and reckless endangerment. The attempted murder charge related to the testing incident remained under investigation, with Richard maintaining that the test failure was an accident, not sabotage. Through it all, Ethan worked tirelessly coordinating with the engineering teams to develop inspection protocols and replacement parts manufacturing. Alexandra focused on transparency, meeting with regulators, investors, and the press to acknowledge the failures and outline the corrective actions underway. On the 3rd day, as they prepared for a joint press conference with the NTSB and FAA, Alexandra received a call from Eleanor Fitzgerald. "The board has completed its initial governance review," Eleanor informed her. "We've determined that while you weren't directly involved in the fraud, your oversight failures contributed significantly to the situation. We're requesting your resignation effective immediately following today's press conference." Alexandra had anticipated this outcome, had prepared herself for it. Still, the finality struck her with unexpected force. "I understand," she said quietly. "Will you allow me to announce it myself?" "Yes, we think that would be appropriate. And Alexandra, the board wants you to know that we recognize your efforts to expose the corruption once you became aware of it. That will be reflected in our public statements." Small comfort, Alexandra thought as she ended the call. Her career was over, her reputation permanently tarnished. Yet compared to the harm that could have resulted from the compromised aircraft components, it seemed a small price to pay. She found Ethan reviewing technical documentation in the conference room they'd been using as a command center. "The board has asked for my resignation," she said without preamble. He looked up, studying her face. "Are you surprised?" "No. It's the right decision. The failures happened under my watch." Alexandra took a seat across from him. "What about you? Will you stay on as advisor after I'm gone?" "For now, the safety work needs to be completed properly." Ethan set aside his documents. "What will you do?" The question hung in the air. Alexandra had been so focused on managing the immediate crisis that she hadn't fully considered her future. Her entire adult life had been dedicated to Westbrook Aerospace, to fulfilling her father's expectations and legacy. Who was she without that identity? "I don't know," she admitted, "but I know I need to do better, be better, more like, well," she hesitated, then finished softly, "more like you." Ethan's expression registered surprise, then a complex emotion Alexandra couldn't quite identify. Before he could respond, his phone rang. The FBI liaison officer they'd been working with. "Reynolds? Yes, we're still at Westbrook headquarters. What, when? We'll stay put. Send additional security." He hung up, his expression grim. Richard's been released on bail. His attorneys convinced the judge that he's not a flight risk due to his deep community ties. Alexandra stared in disbelief. "That's impossible. He tried to kill you. He sent men to your apartment." "There's no direct evidence linking him to the men at my apartment, and he maintains the test failure was an accident, not sabotage." Ethan stood gathering his papers. "The FBI is sending additional agents here as a precaution, but they want us to stay in the building where security is already established." The press conference was scheduled for 2:00 p.m. in Westbrook's main auditorium. By 1:30, journalists were filling the seats, cameras and recording equipment at the ready. Alexandra reviewed her notes in a side room, preparing for what would likely be her final public appearance as CEO of Westbrook Aerospace. At 1:45, as she was making last-minute revisions to her statement, the door opened. Richard Bennett stood in the doorway, impeccably dressed as always, looking for all the world like he was arriving for a routine executive meeting rather than out on bail for corporate fraud. "Alexandra," he said smoothly, "I thought we might have a private word before the circus begins." Alexandra stepped back, her hand reaching for her phone. "You shouldn't be here, Richard. The conditions of your bail don't prohibit me from visiting my workplace. I'm still technically CFO after all." He closed the door behind him, his manner relaxed but his eyes hard as flint. "You've been quite busy in my absence. Safety alerts, stock price in freefall, cozy relationship with the FBI. Not exactly preserving shareholder values, are you?" "I'm preserving lives," Alexandra replied, keeping the desk between them. "Unlike you, I'm not willing to risk people dying to protect profits." "Such moral certainty. Your father would be disappointed." Richard leaned against the door, effectively blocking the exit. He understood the necessary compromises of leadership. "My father never would have compromised safety, never." Richard's laugh was short and bitter. "You really don't know, do you? Where do you think I learned to manage these optimizations? Your father may have built this company on innovation, but he maintained it through carefully calculated risks. The fuel line modification was his initiative originally." The accusation struck Alexandra like a physical blow. "You're lying." "Am I checked the original design modification approval from 5 years ago? His signature is right there beside mine." Richard's smile was cold. He became uncomfortable with the implementation details later, started asking questions at an inconvenient time. Then, fortunately for everyone, his heart gave out. Alexandra felt the blood drain from her face. "Are you saying you—" "I'm saying heart attacks are unpredictable, especially in men under significant stress." Richard straightened, adjusting his tie. "Just as accidents can happen during testing procedures or when driving on rainy nights. Life is full of risks, Alexandra. That's the lesson your father never fully embraced." The implied threat hung in the air between them. Alexandra's mind raced, processing the horrifying insinuation about her father's death while simultaneously calculating her options for escape. Her phone was in her hand, but security was stationed outside the auditorium, not near this preparation room. "What do you want, Richard?" she asked, playing for time fingers, discreetly activating the voice recording on her phone. "Originally to suggest a mutually beneficial arrangement. The evidence against Mimi is largely circumstantial. With your cooperation, my attorneys believe the most serious charges could be reduced or dismissed." He stepped closer to the desk. "But now I see you're too far gone. Reynolds has gotten to you with his sanctimonious crusade." "It's not a crusade, Richard. It's basic human decency." Alexandra maintained eye contact, refusing to show fear despite her racing heart. "People could have died, might still die because of what you did. People die every day. Companies make calculated risks. That's business." Richard's controlled demeanor slipped, slightly revealing the rage beneath. "Your father understood that. I thought you did too when you signed Reynolds' termination. But it seems you're not your father's daughter after all." "Thank you for making that clear." Alexandra raised her chin slightly. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a press conference to attend." "You won't be attending anything." Richard reached into his jacket and withdrew a small handgun. "Sit down, Alexandra." The sight of the weapon sent adrenaline coursing through her system. Alexandra remained standing, mind calculating desperately. The press conference would begin in minutes. Someone would come looking for her if she didn't appear. "Richard, there are federal agents and hundreds of witnesses just outside this door. You can't possibly think you'll get away with this." "Get away? That's not the objective anymore." Richard's expression was eerily calm now, all pretense abandoned. "The company is finished. My reputation is destroyed. My freedom forfeited. But I won't let you stand on that stage and portray yourself as the righteous whistleblower while demonizing me for policies your father helped implement. So what's your plan? Kill me and then what? Escape through the window?" Alexandra gestured to the 10th floor view behind her. "Sometimes there's value in controlling how the story ends, even if you don't survive to see the epilogue." Richard raised the gun, aiming it steadily at her chest. "It's what your father would have done. Preserved his legacy at any cost." Alexandra's mind flashed to Lily's innocent face, to Ethan's steady determination, to the simple kindness they had shown her despite everything. If her father truly had been as Richard described, and she wasn't convinced he had, then perhaps his legacy wasn't worth preserving after all. "You're wrong about my father," Alexandra said quietly, "and you're wrong about legacy. It's not about control or reputation. It's about the lives you touch, the good you do. Something I'm only beginning to understand." A knock at the door interrupted Richard's response. "Ms. Westbrook, 5 minutes to the press conference." A security guard's voice. Richard tensed, eyes darting to the door, then back to Alexandra. "Tell them you'll be right there." "I'm having an urgent discussion with Mr. Bennett," Alexandra called out instead, voice deliberately steady. "Please inform the FBI agents that he's here." Richard's face contorted with fury. He lunged across the desk, gun raised, just as the door burst open behind him. Two security guards and an FBI agent entered, weapons drawn. "Drop the gun, Bennett," the agent commanded. "Now." Time seemed to slow. Richard turned partially toward the door, weapon still in hand. Alexandra saw his finger tighten on the trigger, saw the decision form in his eyes a split second before he swung the gun toward the agent. The sound of gunshots filled the small room. Richard crumpled to the floor, blood spreading across his immaculate suit jacket. The agent rushed forward, kicking the gun away from Richard's outstretched hand while checking for a pulse. "Call medical suspect, down but alive," the agent reported into his radio. He turned to Alexandra, who stood frozen behind the desk. "Are you injured, Ms. Westbrook?" Alexandra shook her head, unable to find words as she stared at Richard's unconscious form. The man who had been her mentor, her father's trusted advisor, now lay bleeding on her office floor, the ultimate consequence of corruption that had festered for years beneath Westbrook's polished corporate veneer. Medical personnel arrived within minutes, stabilizing Richard for transport to the hospital. FBI agents secured the scene, collecting Richard's weapon and Alexandra's phone with its recording of his implied confession. Through it all, Alexandra remained eerily calm, answering questions with precision while compartmentalizing the trauma of the encounter. When Ethan found her 30 minutes later, she was sitting alone in a different preparation room, staring at her reflection in a darkened window. "The press conference has been postponed," he said quietly. "The FBI wants to complete their investigation of the scene first." Alexandra nodded, still staring at her reflection. "He implied that my father was involved, that the fuel line modification was originally his idea." Ethan took a seat beside her. "Do you believe that?" "I don't know what to believe anymore." She turned to face him. "My whole life I've tried to live up to my father's legacy, to be worthy of the company he built. What if that legacy was built on the same compromises Richard made? What if I've been aspiring to an ideal that never existed? Does it matter?" Ethan's question was gentle but direct. "Your father's choices were his own, just as yours are yours. The question isn't what he would have done, it's what you will do now." The simple wisdom of his words penetrated the shock that had enveloped her. Alexandra had spent her life measuring herself against her father's accomplishments, his expectations. Perhaps it was time to establish her own moral compass, independent of his shadow. "I'm resigning as CEO," she said. "The board already requested it, but I would have done it anyway. Westbrook needs new leadership untainted by this scandal." "And what will you do next?" The question echoed their earlier conversation, interrupted by news of Richard's bail. This time, however, Alexandra had an answer forming in her mind. "I want to learn how to actually help people, not just through corporate philanthropy or mission statements, but directly, with my own hands." She looked at Ethan, vulnerability showing through her usually composed exterior. "I was thinking about emergency medical training. Seeing what you do, how you saved my life, despite everything, it made me realize there's value in work that directly preserves life rather than just building things that might endanger it." Ethan studied her with surprise. "EMT training is demanding, and the pay is nowhere near what you're accustomed to." "I don't need the money. I need purpose. Real purpose, not just corporate objectives and shareholder value." Alexandra's voice grew stronger as the idea crystallized. "Would it be completely inappropriate to ask if you could help me navigate that world? At least to start." Before Ethan could answer, Agent Michaels entered the room. "Ms. Westbrook, we need your formal statement regarding the incident with Mr. Bennett. And Mr. Reynolds, we have an update on your daughter and neighbor. They've been cleared to return home tomorrow with security precautions in place until all suspects are in custody." The moment broke and they followed Michaels to provide statements and review security arrangements. The rescheduled press conference was set for the following morning, giving authorities time to process the attempted assault and giving Alexandra time to refine her statement in light of the day's dramatic events. That night, in the quiet of her hotel room, Alexandra drafted her resignation letter and her press statement. She acknowledged her failures of oversight, announced her immediate departure from the company, and outlined the corrective actions Westbrook was taking to address the safety issues and governance problems. She ended with a personal note. Leadership isn't about control or infallibility. It's about accountability, transparency, and the courage to change course when necessary. I failed to embody these principles as CEO, but I commit to carrying them forward in whatever path I pursue next. The press conference the next morning was a somber affair. Alexandra delivered her statement with dignity, answering questions directly, and taking full responsibility for the oversight failures, while clearly outlining Richard's fraud and the company's corrective actions. When asked about her future plans, she simply stated that she would be exploring opportunities to serve the community in more direct ways. Ethan stood at the back of the room, watching as she navigated the difficult terrain with unexpected grace. The woman at the podium was markedly different from the polished, somewhat distant CEO he had first confronted in her hospital room. There was an authenticity to her now, a humility born of genuine reckoning rather than strategic damage control. As the press conference concluded, the board's lead director announced the appointment of an interim CEO and the formation of a special committee to oversee the company's recovery and cooperation with ongoing investigations. Ethan would continue as special advisor for safety remediation, ensuring that all affected aircraft components were properly inspected and replaced. Alexandra slipped away from the couch as soon as the formal proceedings ended, finding momentary solitude in her now empty office. She was gathering a few personal items when Ethan appeared in the doorway. "That couldn't have been easy," he said, watching as she placed a photograph of her father in a small box. "Easier than I expected, actually." Alexandra studied the photograph of her father at the company's 50th anniversary celebration, proud and commanding. "I think I've been holding on to an idealized version of him. Richard's claims, they've forced me to see him as human, flawed like all of us. For what it's worth, I worked with your father for several years before his death. He was demanding, sometimes ruthless in business, but I never saw him compromise on safety. Whatever Richard claimed, I'd want more evidence before believing it." Alexandra placed the photo in the box. "Thank you for that. But either way, I can't build my life around living up to his legacy anymore. I need to create my own." "About what you said yesterday, the EMT training." Ethan leaned against the doorframe. "It's not inappropriate to ask for guidance. If you're serious about it, I know some good programs, people who could help you get started." "I am serious." Alexandra closed the box, turning to face him fully. "More serious than I've been about anything in a long time." "Then I'll help, not because I owe you anything, but because it's the right thing to do." A ghost of a smile crossed Ethan's face. "And because my daughter would never forgive me if I didn't. She's decided you're her new friend." The mention of Lily brought warmth to Alexandra's expression. "She's an extraordinary child. You've done an amazing job with her, especially given the circumstances. She makes it easy. Kids have a way of cutting through the noise, focusing on what really matters." Ethan hesitated, then added, "There's an EMT orientation session next month at Alexandria Central. Preliminary requirements overview of the program. If you want, I could put your name on the list." "I'd like that." Alexandra picked up her box of belongings. "It seems fitting starting over in the same place where all of this began. On that bridge in the rain. Life has a way of bringing things full circle." Ethan stepped aside to let her pass through the doorway. "But the important part isn't where the circle begins or ends. It's who we become as we travel around it." 1 month later, Alexandra sat in a classroom at Alexandria Central Medical Center, surrounded by prospective EMT trainees from all walks of life. The instructor, a veteran paramedic named Carlos, was explaining the physical and emotional demands of the job when the door opened. Ethan entered now in his official capacity as a training coordinator. He acknowledged Alexandra with a small nod before addressing the class about the practical exercises they would be conducting that afternoon. As he spoke, Alexandra felt none of the shame or awkwardness she had anticipated. Instead, there was a surprising sense of rightness, as if after years of moving in the wrong direction, she had finally found her proper path. It wouldn't be easy. The physical training alone would be challenging, especially with her still healing injuries. The psychological adjustment from corporate leadership to public service would require fundamental shifts in perspective and priority. But watching Ethan demonstrate basic life-saving techniques, remembering how his hands had kept her heart beating on that rainy night, Alexandra knew this was where she needed to be. Not seeking redemption, some mistakes couldn't be fully redeemed, but seeking purpose. A way to add more to the world than she took from it. After the orientation, as other prospective trainees filed out, Ethan approached her desk. First impressions, intimidating, Alexandra admitted, but in a good way, like something worth committing to. It is. Ethan gathered his materials. By the way, Lily has been asking when you're coming for dinner again. She wants to show you her science project, something about bridge engineering. I'd like that. Alexandra shouldered her bag, a simple canvas tote that had replaced her designer briefcase. How is she doing after everything? Better. The nightmares are less frequent. Having a normal routine helps. Ethan hesitated. She's resilient. Kids usually are if they have stability and honesty. You've given her both. Alexandra walked beside him toward the exit. Despite everything that happened, that's something to be proud of. Outside, the autumn sun cast long shadows across the parking lot. The same river that ran beneath the bridge, where they had first crossed paths, glittered in the distance, its waters continuing their eternal journey toward the sea. Friday at 6, Ethan suggested. For dinner, nothing fancy, just pasta and maybe ice cream if Lily finishes her homework. Sounds perfect. Alexandra smiled genuinely and without reservation. I'll bring dessert. As she walked to her car, a modest sedan that had replaced her luxury BMW, Alexandra felt a weight lifting. Not completely perhaps, never completely, but enough to allow forward momentum. Enough to believe that second chances weren't just possible, but worthy of pursuit. Behind her, Ethan watched her go, his own journey of forgiveness still unfolding, but progressing day by day. Some wounds would always leave scars, but they need not define the future. There was work to be done, lives to save, a daughter to raise, and perhaps, unexpectedly, a new friendship to cultivate. 1 year later, the Westbrook Safety Trust held its inaugural conference. Engineers, safety officers, and industry leaders gathered to share best practices and honor whistleblowers who had spoken truth despite personal cost. Ethan, now the Trust's executive director, delivered the keynote address to a packed auditorium. Alexandra sat in the audience beside Lily, both listening intently as Ethan spoke about creating cultures where safety concerns could be raised without fear of retaliation. His words carried the weight of personal experience, but no bitterness, only determination to prevent others from facing what he had endured. Saving lives isn't just about emergency response, Ethan concluded. It's about creating systems where preventable tragedies never occur. It's about valuing human life above quarterly profits. It's about courage, the courage to speak up when something isn't right, and the courage to listen when difficult truths are spoken. The audience rose in a standing ovation. Alexandra joined them, pride evident in her expression. In her EMT uniform, she had completed her certification 3 months earlier. She represented a different kind of leadership than she had as CEO. Less visible, perhaps, less celebrated, but infinitely more meaningful to her now. After the conference, as Ethan joined them for the walk back to the car, Lily skipped ahead, her backpack bouncing with each step. Remarkable speech, Alexandra said. The trust is making real change in the industry. It's a start, Ethan agreed. A good one. They walked in comfortable silence for a moment, watching Lily examine a fascinating leaf she'd discovered on the sidewalk. You saved me twice, Alexandra said quietly. Once on that bridge, and once by showing me a different way to live. Let me spend my life saving with you. Ethan smiled, the tension that had once characterized his expression now softened by time and healing. I think we already are. As they reached the car, Lily called them forward to show her leaf collection. Their hands brushed briefly as they leaned in to admire her discovery, a small moment of connection that would have seemed impossible a year earlier. Yet here they were, two people who had once stood on opposite sides of a terrible mistake, now finding themselves on the same side of something beautiful. A second chance, hard-earned and authentic. Not perfect, not without challenges ahead, but grounded in truth, mutual respect, and the shared commitment to doing what was right even when it wasn't easy. Especially then.